We'll go now into our third session.
Thank you.
Much delayed. Thank you. Much delayed, but nonetheless, hopefully interesting for those of you who have some, who are perhaps also seeing that academic work often takes its who will be speaking about Bhutan's digital journey, challenges of cyber data sovereignty. And the discussant for this session is Dr. Tshering, and he will be offering his remarks afterwards. So Jigme Tshering, without further ado, please, the floor is yours.
Good example to everyone there. Okay. Firstly, I like government for Center for the Study of Democracy, University of Westminster, and also to Dr. Nitasha and the Chinapki sir for helping me with your kind words. Without much delay. And also I'd like to clarify that I'm not affiliated to any organization inside the country and outside the country as well. And I'm present in international relations, and the views expressed, observations made, and arguments proposed are completely personal. Okay, so cyber data sovereignty and a case study of Bhutan's digitalization journey. Overview. Firstly, I'll briefly touch on the background of cyber data sovereignty, and the observation is complete. And I have tried to twist and turn my paper as much as I could so that I can fit to the conference theme and to my audience. So firstly, I'll be looking at a brief background on cyber data sovereignty, and also I'll be looking into what are the opportunities and challenges offered by digitalization to a small landlocked states like Bhutan and its craft and deliver greater security and prosperity in the digital era to Bhutan. Its digital future, given the geopolitical realities and geo-economic realities and placing Bhutan within the larger context of South Asia. So the concept of data sovereignty emerged in early 2000s in the field of security studies. And as the number of internet users expanded across the world and its unlimited applications in the sphere of military, politics, and other social aspects became evident, the states increasingly saw the benefit of having some degree of power and control over this virtual space. And though the concept and the definition of data sovereignty differs from country to country, and it also varies on who is defining data sovereignty. For example, lots of countries have their own definition. US define data sovereignty different way than what the European Union describes, or the Russians or the Chinese do. Just to say, the Russians don't have, the Russian language does not have a word for data. For data, they don't have a word in Russian language, which would the closest approximation they have, it's like information, and then that information would also include the information the people have in their mind as well. These are prevalent in the literature, but however, the cyber digital data sovereignty revolves around two themes and can be summarized into three debates. So in my paper, I'm considering the word cyber and the digital as interchangeable. Actually, if you go into the technicality of these terms, then you may find a bit. However, they will have a vast similarities in it. So the two themes that are usually involved in all the definitions of the data sovereignty are power and independence. And the three debates that I'd like to sum up the data sovereignty are global north-south debate, on digital sovereignty, state and corporate debate on digital sovereignty, and citizens. Talking in terms of the states in the global south and the global north and south debate on digital sovereignty, the state's rationale for digital sovereignty comes from the threat posed by other states due to the lack of uh, control over the internet infrastructure. And in this context, the threat to a state sovereignty emanates not only from the non-state actors, but also from the other states in the international system. And it has even become Snowden's revelation of mass global surveillance carried out by um, some bigger superpowers and their allies. And such international events have contributed in connecting data sovereignty to national security, and which has further uh, intensified the state's need for digital sovereignty that can be termed and explained from what we generally call as the governance of internet infrastructure. So looks for the looks for the sovereignty in looks for the sovereignty in exercising its control over its population. Traditionally, the concept of sovereignty was mainly based on the Westphalian state system, where where the four elements of sovereignty were being considered the most important, like the territory, the population, the organization, and the internal and external sovereignty having the monopoly to use force. As the technological advancement were happening in the world, the states felt that in order to protect the territory of its state, they felt that they need to expand their power and their influence in the air. So which later on gave to the sovereignty expansion into the airspace. And then they felt, and just protecting your country and your territory from state and the from land was not enough, then which later on expanded into the international. It, as the whole world is moving into the cyberspace, and with the recent pandemic, 50% or more than that, a very significant portion of the world has moved into the cyberspace. And now the states are losing their traditional control and the power that they had on the entities within their jurisdiction. Is now they are losing that entity, and that's the reason why states feel that they need to have the cyber digital sovereignty. Corporate debate on digital data sovereignty. So for many years, big technology companies have remained un, uh, under-regulated, as they were mostly pockets of entrepreneurial startups with success stories, and much people use Microsoft, Facebook, or Amazon than the population of other countries. Their profit exceeds the budget of many states, and within short period of time, these and their corporate governing decisions already affect the rights and freedom of billions of people. But the tech companies are now going a step further by positioning themselves as the authorized data owner collected from their consumers. So now the internet firms provide just not only the tech services they were initially providing. Now societal infrastructures that they are able to provide to the global citizen, and also their decisions are very binding with state matters on highly sensitive points. And the emergence of the non-state corporate powerhouses, which are generally unaccountable, unregulated by the conventional political instruments or statecraft yardsticks. Now that has led to a new structural barriers in assisting in. So in this whole process, now the individual citizens who are the actual source, or the who are the actual source of data that these companies and these international actors and states are contesting for, their rights and their privacy are being compromised in this whole debate. So the idea of data sovereignty can be explained in this within these three debates. it can be explained within these three debates, which brings me to my next idea. So this was the brief background of how digital data sovereignty is functioning globally. And now I'd like to connect that with Bhutan's nascent digitalization process. So digitalization in Bhutan, development and development and modernization. So Bhutan received internet and television only in 1999, and today, after just 2 decades plus, I'm attending this virtual conference from my home. So we can see how far we have come up. So then, why digitalization is so much important in Bhutan, and why? What are the historical linkages that we have with development and modernization? So if you are looking at to the geopolitical context of 1950s and 1990s, beginning its planned developmental activities from 1961, the political events and political episodes happening in South Asia, especially in Indian subcontinent, that has really shaped how Bhutan looked into modernization and development. The the 1959 incident at our country's northern front has really made our Bhutanese authorities realize that a top priority for stability and security. So Bhutan expanded into these modernization and developmental activities with the security agenda initially. Now the information and now the adoption of ICT into the public delivery system, we were looking into it as early as 2004, where we first roll out the clearance, uh, where we issue security clearance to our citizens. So that was the first. That was the first of it, and uh, which generally helped in giving an idea of how ICT enabled public delivery, public social delivery can help in enhancing our country. And the and successfully rolled out was the establishment uh, was the online security clearance form, reducing the time taken from people to avail the security benefits of utilizing the ICT services delivery. And in 2000 and e-services with the centralized government to citizen, the G2C initiative in 2010 was a major watershed movement in terms of digitalization in Bhutan. And the private sector development after 2010, the government realized that the digitalization process in Bhutan must be taken up by the government agencies and the private sector alike, which led to the development and which led to the development projects like Timbutik Park and all in 2000. National IT companies to grow in long run. And I'm more interested, and my paper basically looks into the how digital Google flagship program is going to change the digitalization process and the complexities involved with the current government's digital Google flagship program. And if we look at the policy document of digital Google flagship program, then the policy document outlines government and to the general citizen in availing the opportunities provided in the 21st century. However, when we look into the technology as an agency through which we can empower our citizen and improve the pace of public service delivery and business operation in the market, we are lacking out some section of our society. So to be empowering giving that agency to the people who are actually missing that agency. But if we see in it, then the technology is empowering only to those section of the population who have access to technology. So those of the people who don't have access to technology, for them it can be very dis it can be very disempowering. And then this would lead to the drawing of line between digital haves and digital have-nots in long run, uh, which would be the new social structure. If we see in the conventional times, then the caste, religion, and all of these social structures were uh, prohibiting the mobility of people on the social status ladder. But now, if we ignore the access to technology, creation of having people which who would be who would have been denied the accessibility to the social mobility, and lack of long-term economic vision. So this has often been outlined in a lot of economic reviews and reports, where Bhutan have always been judged out of not having a long-term economic vision, and long-term economic vision, not a consistent long-term economic vision. Our economic policies have always been changing and pivoting time and again, and there is a general lack of consensus among the policymakers and the decision takers that how would our country and how would our economy look like 30 years down the road? What would our people and what would our youth take up? Uh, what kind of occupation they would take up, what kind of livelihood they would aspire to, and what kind of economic aspiration as a country and as a society we would have. So we are losing some grasp on it. And how do we want to envision our digital future? Now, since we are talking about digitalization and digitalizing our country, digitalizing our economy and all, how do we actually want to envision our digital future? How do we want our youths to have? What kind of social behaviors, what kind of social, political, economic thought do we want our people to have in vision of achieving GNH? So how are we looking into it? And if you look into the policy documents which outline all of these things, be it in entrepreneurship, be it in innovation, be it on envisioning our digital future, then the terminology adopted into these policy documents are very generic. We need to promote entrepreneurship and like innovation. So we are not going to nitty-gritties of practically applying them on the ground. So that's the brief background of how digitalization, how I observe the digitalization process is being happening in Bhutan. And now I'd like to move on with the data sovereignty landscape in Bhutan. And for that, I'll be using the cyber capability maturity model developed by the Global Cybersecurity Capability Center. And they have 5 dimensions. And the first dimension is policy and strategy. So the 2018 Ministry of Information and Communication, Ministry of the first policy documents, Information, Communication and Media Act of 2018 outlines Ministry of Information as the binding institution and as the binding institution who have the control over the data which are being within the country. And the Information, Communication, Media Act 2018 replaces the 2006 Information and Media Communication Act, and the act also outlines the installment of Bhutan Computer Incident Response Team, which is basically which basically handles all the cyber happening within the country, and also outline the basic standards and standard operating procedures. And the Bhutan Information and Management Security management security policy uh, policy outlines the procurement of all the ITC related infrastructure development materials within the country. However, there has been no literature indicating how successful these government acts and policies have implemented, and how helpful they have been in providing uh, data sovereignty to Bhutanese people and to the organization at large. And the second is the second dimension is cybersecurity, culture and society. So cyber risk is substantially low and almost non-existent in our country because of our nascent digitalization that we are in. And also, if we look at the nature of our society, uh, then the Bhutanese society is featured by high solidarity and community bond, and the philosophy of GNH and its values of compassion, non-violence, malaise to none are highly upheld in terms of day-to-day activities. And given the cultural context of our country and the lack of cybersecurity risks at national level, the cybersecurity uh, risks has not been a national priority for a very long time. Now, in the recent past, with the Royal government's effort towards e-governance and emergence of IT firms and e-commerce sites, and the development of online payment services has raised concerns over the online privacy and the cybersecurity incidents that are emerging in the country. The report outlines that the cybersecurity and culture, in terms of culture and society, the cybersecurity general awareness is at a startup maturity level, and there is a great challenge in rising cyber risk awareness in the mindset of the larger population. And culture, the Bhutanese society and the cyber behavior of Bhutanese people have always been seen as not very careful, and Bhutanese have this general tendency to believe on whatever they see in the cyberspace, which generally lands our people into phishing and foreign scammings. The third dimension is cybersecurity education and training and skills. So the education, training and skills is also leveled at a startup level, and the report also outlines that our education and training that are being provided and the skills that are being provided is at a it's more at an ideational and as a basic level. And also these trainings and skilling up programs are limited to a certain section of audience. These trainings are only given to IT personnel and ICT officers and ICT teachers and all, which whereas we need this education and training and skills to the general population in order to have a more careful and cyber behavior, and as well as also this would also enhance our digitalization process as well. And the fourth dimension is legal and regulatory frameworks. So in terms of legal and regulatory frameworks, there are three dimensions: the cybersecurity legal framework, legal investigation, and responsible reporting. The legal and in terms of cybersecurity legal framework, there is a lack of comprehensive ITC security legislation, despite the fact that government acts such as ICM Act 2018 and etc. The existing act and legislation do not provide any security requirements for organizations and standard security operations. It does not cover data regulation and data storage, usage, transfer, and further the lack of synchronization in defining what constitutes cybercrime differs with different organization and policy documents. For instance, the BCIM and the Royal Bhutan Penal Code defines differently. And secondly, in terms of legal investigation, it is vital field to combat cybercrimes. The Royal Bhutan Police is officially responsible for legal investigations, anti-corruption, but like organizations like anti-corruption do have a digital forensic expert as well as a digital forensic lab. Though these cybercrimes reports are rare and few cases pertaining to identity theft, pornography, and defamation have been brought to trial. It is notable that these authorities lack capacity to investigate cybercrimes. In terms of trans-border cybercrimes, there is a void for mutual legal international cooperation and assistance treaty to facilitate investigation of cross-border crimes. Additionally, it is most likely that cybercrimes goes unprosecuted. And lastly, responsible reporting, given the scenario of low institutional capacity and also the lack of proper reporting procedure for cybercrimes, most of the cases go unreported, or it might be due to the lack of awareness on cybercrimes. And yeah, that's how the responsible reporting has also been seen as one of the major factors why the cyber incidents go unprosecuted. And the fifth dimension is standard organization and technologies. The IMSP for Royal Government Bhutan was adopted by the cabinet, and the implementing authority was granted to DITT under MOIC. Further, it has been noticed that a substantial impact has not been made due to limited resources. Further, the standard procurement of IT materials, quasi-standard requirements are in place, but does not particularly pertains to security. A World Bank and Cybersecurity Capability Center 2015 report indicates that in the financial, telecommunication, and private sector, procurement is primarily dictated by price and function rather than the security standards. For command and control, the incident response team is being guided by BTCIRT, and which is under DITT. After establishment of the Bhutan Computer Incident Response Team, the country saw a significant improvement in terms of incident reporting, handling, as well as enhanced knowledge sharing within the government organizations. So now I'd like to move on with the digital sovereignty opportunity and challenges in Bhutan. So technologically, the cyber infrastructure in Bhutan is considered at a startup level from all aspects. Though the cybersecurity risk profile is projected to be low and almost non-existent, however, the cyber incidents have grown in recent times. Hacking, phishing, virus distribution, malware are common cyber issues faced today by Bhutanese netizens. And these issues are not just threats at individual level, but on organization level as well. And in a report titled "The Tracking GhostNet in Investigating a Cyber Espionage Network," they found that Bhutan's 12 computers of government organization in Bhutan has always have been affected by the espionage network as well. And out of 103 countries affected by the espionage network, out of which close to 30% can be considered as high value targets, and most of the targets relate to the governmental organizations. And another major cyber incident occurred in 2016 when the Bank of Bhutan was dubbed to transfer 16 million in Bhutanese currency to supposedly send from to 3 different bank accounts in India, Malaysia, and Thailand, based on a fake email letter supposedly sent from the sent from Royal Audit Authority. So due to the infant and the nascent stage of cyber infrastructure in the country, there's a huge opportunity that we invest in our critical cyber infrastructures, and this will not only help us in this will not only help us in building these infrastructures, but it will also help us in creating employment and also inculcating the Bhutanese version of developing technology with values, and the vision implementing indigenous ethical considerations and Buddhist moral philosophy in building technology can be done through the opportunities that we currently have. And the next opportunity and challenge I'd like to review it from the geopolitical lens. So Bhutan, being located between India and China, and the geostrategic location poses immense challenge. At the same time, it offers certain opportunities, and the geopolitics can provide an imperative yardstick to comprehend the imagined geopolitical security threats and opportunities in cyberspace through the analysis of representation. A representation is a construction of perceived threats and perceived psychological threats and perceptions that we have about our neighbors. And given the geopolitics in the cyberspace, Bhutan's inherent ambivalence with our neighbor is likely to manifest in the cyberspace, threatening digital sovereignty, critical state documents, e-governance infrastructures, and service delivery mechanisms are critical to digitalized states. And these networks are vulnerable to various cyber attacks and insurgents, rival states, separatist groups, and all. For instance, the ITU report on readiness assessment of Bhutan Computer Incident Response Team emphasizes that even at the governmental level, there is a lack of availability of incident handling team for coordination and information sharing with necessary capabilities and competencies. And in the process of state digitalization, digital alliances, collaborations are essential for successful implementation of policies. And for a small state like Bhutan, constrained with its geography and limited resources, engagements with digital partners and building collaboration is very imperative. In Bhutan, faced with confronting its geopolitical realities between two giants, establishing digital partnership is essential for Bhutan. And the strategic importance of Bhutan's location to our neighbors has heavily limited the foreign policy options for Bhutan. And in recent times, the Indo-Bhutan relation have ventured into engagements into cyber missions, into space missions and digital infrastructure developments. However, if we look at our fiber optic connection, the only two fiber optic connection Bhutan has through the Siliguri corridor. Both of these fiber optic lines are through the narrow Siliguri corridor, which is very prone to natural disasters and also to other alterations. And given the vulnerability of our internet connection, this could highly compromise our whole internet infrastructure that we are trying to build. And lastly, I'd like to go with geo-economic challenge and opportunities. So in the digitalized states need to be backed by a digital economy, and the investment and material capacity and strategic partnership required for successful digitalization can be achieved only through collaboration with other states and international organizations. Funding aid, grants, and technical support will be required as the national capacity is limited. However, the over dependence on external investment raises the question of sustainability and autonomy in long run. The lack of economic resources coupled with limited geo-economic and geopolitical pathways hinders Bhutan's effort to exert digital sovereignty. Bhutan had to depend on international geo-economic arrangements. Hence, navigating through these hurdles would determine Bhutan's digital future in long run to come. And the public-private partnership model for digitalization would ease Bhutan's dependence upon upon external stakeholders, and the capacity to develop human resource trainings for private entities would help in achieving more sustainable digitalized Bhutan. Conclusion and recommendations. The COVID-19 pandemic has really gave us a big push in digitalizing our service delivery, be it in terms of online payments and all, and even rethinking about how resilient our education system and how resilient our overall system has also been recently coming into light. And the strategic, and given that opportunity by the pandemic to Bhutan, the cyberspace with lot of development in live streaming, online content creation can give us Bhutan and Bhutanese youth a strategic place to develop Bhutan's own narrative on the world views, on Bhutanese philosophies, on Bhutan's way of life, on Bhutan's social thinking of honesty, integrity, like on honesty, integrity, and all, which would give an alternative view to the existing views in the international system. And as a youth myself, and observing the Bhutan's whole digitalization process, I feel that the techno-political leadership is one of the I feel that the techno-political leadership is one of the most important component in the whole digitalization process. The inconsistency in terms of digitalization policies and our education policies that would in long run have a huge impact on it. Today, there's a general obsession with this STEAM subject that everybody should study coding, everybody should know AI, all the youths and all the kids should choose science subject and all. But given that our policymakers and decision makers and politicians should understand that what engineers can do, what economic student can do, what a tech guy can do, if the policymakers have that idea of what technology can do and what potential the current level of technology has given to our country, and if these decision makers are able to craft a pathway for Bhutan based on our resources and based on our capability, then that would lead to a more sustainable and a resilient digitalization process in the country. Just admitting someone. Okay. Thank you, and thank you, love. That's all.
Thank you so much, Jigme, for your presentation. I'm going to actually just check and confirm once. Yes. Okay. Thank you. We are running late, as you can see. However, I think that we should take the time now to reflect on Jigme's paper and then go for the break and then come back. So Jigme, Dr. Sige is unfortunately not able to be here, and I will be asking, I will be finding out further details in due course afterwards from people there on the ground about this. However, I have been listening to your presentation very carefully, and I will take on, and as a politics and IR person, I think this is. And with the Bhutan context, I think this is deeply interesting, and perhaps I'm far more formally able to do this than for agriculture or something else. So I will offer my remarks here. So I think that first of all, you've raised some really interesting, important questions, and and I don't know how much of today's session you've attended, but the idea is to work from this on academic papers for a volume, and we'd certainly be interested in your work as well. And I've read some aspects of your work from which this draws on, and I know that you had to compress a lot of things when especially in the first part where you're kind of talking about why we need a concept like digital sovereignty, or why we need to talk about data at all. So I want to just offer some comments, and within those comments, there'll also be certain questions or things that I would want to, I would want for us to think further about, and you to maybe answer or think through. So firstly, when at the start, when you, and maybe this is a framing issue, but when you said states are losing power because of the, the kind of digital, I just want to push you a little bit and ask, are they actually losing power, or is this just a new domain? Is this just, new kinds of domains that are being created? Because this is the same sort of thing that, that many in social science and politics across a variety of fields, the debates that we had in the 1990s about, between communitarians and cosmopolitans. As a politics student, you might be aware of that, are states losing control due to globalization? Do states not have control over their borders anymore? Do states not have control over their economies anymore? And what we found out in the longer run, a few decades hence, is that it shifts. It's not as if the state is going away, or that, that the state is at, is threatened in any way. It's simply that the natures of the states change. So while we have, we still have the Weberian ideal type model of the, the political community and the monopoly over the use of force, but the ways in which it manifests itself changes. So that's perhaps just a framing issue. Now, I think that, one thing that the next point that I want to talk about is what in some parts of the world we refer to as digital poverty, right? So the fact that so many services are actually going online, and that it is important to have access to the internet for so many services, that if people are left out from that, they are not just not getting access to the internet, they're also not being able to access their banks properly, or access, certain kinds of food properly, or get their appointments at a medical provider. So if in the future, especially due to pandemic, pandemic enforced situations where there may be, certain kinds of welfarist rollbacks or other employment, declining opportunities for employment, which would lead to greater use of online services, then those people, there would be specific subsets of any population that would be more vulnerable due to this, in this new environment, because of not being able to access digital services. And there, I think you're right about drawing attention to the thoughts and behaviors, and as being part of that story of the digital future for the youth, but also for the elderly. So I also for those who have a different set of challenges in coping with the digital domain. I wanted to, the background that you gave us about the various kind of policies, the e-services, the various initiatives, all of that, really, appreciate that very much. I wanted to say, several times in your presentation, I got this feeling of this critique that I wanted to know, that I think any reader would want to, or listener would want to know a bit more. And I know this is just a presentation, but perhaps in a paper. So for instance, you hinted various times at the ways in which policies are inconsistent. They keep changing. The terminology is generic. Now, that is, it's something that all institutions, government, states, everywhere have these challenges. But I would like to know if you had some specific examples in mind. When you talk about these changing policies, or when you say that the policies have been inconsistent, it would certainly from an academic perspective be more persuasive if you said which policies you had in mind when you refer to these practical challenges. Now, coming to the second part of your presentation, I think you're spot on for highlighting the vulnerabilities that digital domains pose. And how, infrastructures, I mean, we've had so many examples of this globally, of how, in Europe, in Estonia, so many examples of these attacks on critical cyber infrastructures and what they can cause. So this is a really important point that should be well taken by everyone. And I think that this is, there's only so much that can be done with the resources that any state has or agency has at at its disposal, but certainly this is something to think about. And I think this is really important as a whole lot of other kind of transactions and things move online. In Bhutan's case, I think the foreign policy options, the kind of domestic situations, not only is it all very interdomestic, but also lots of things are actually endogenously driven. So it's not a straightforward matter, either ambivalence or collaboration with any other kind of entity. It's not a straightforward matter in many cases, and so there are a specific set of challenges. I mean, it's a small country, but tremendously complex country. I kind of smiled a little bit when you said in between India and China, because I just published a paper earlier this year talking about how this construction of Bhutan as this in between thing actually already places a certain understanding of Bhutan geopolitically. So I mean, we'll communicate about that. But I feel that perhaps if we could frame Bhutan also in different ways, so that it's not only limited to being in between, and that's again, again another kind of thing that you also hinted at, which is reclaiming strategic narrative space. Like, how do we talk about things in ways that make us think about those things differently, so that things can be done perhaps differently or somewhat differently. The super important point about the obsession with AI and coding that everyone everywhere has, and it's something that managers and those in charge of managing and governing and delivering anywhere, always throughout history, have always loved rather simpler answers to very complex questions. And the simpler answers often tend to be the ones that can be quantified easily and can be, codified easily. And so therefore there is clearly a technocratic incentive to produce these kinds of solutions, because then the kind of the deliberation part seems to be taken care of if we are doing it with an algorithm. But of course, algorithms also pose their own problems. And now we have a situation where I think it was last year that an algorithm was placed on the board of a London company as well. So, there's this idea of kind of moving from the human to the technological, but also at the same time, notwithstanding this, the importance of this, it's also where, what are the domains where it is applicable? If we have, it's not that we should think that this is applicable to everything. We have to think of where it's most applicable. And I think lastly, one other point, actually, going back, sorry, I missed one sheet. Going back to, when you said policy inconsistency, and I said that I would want to know more, which you also said there's no literature indicating that government policies have been successfully implemented. And again, I'm wondering if you're referring just to the IT domain, or what sort of, like, what did you have in mind when you were talking about those policies for which no literature exists? And I think that, another interesting conversation that I don't know if you were here for Kencho's presentation earlier today morning, but we were talking about these sorts of things following on from her presentation about, how do we get the critical literatures, and how do we kind of see what works, what doesn't, and how to review and adjust that. And I think I would, one final sort of comment or question for you. When you talked about the intersection of technology and Buddhist moral philosophy, I wondered if you had something specific in mind. I mean, of course, if you mean things like that, there should be more about, there can be more online about, say, why Thadamtse is important or why GNH is important. Yes, that exists. But did you have anything else that was specifically in your mind when you were talking about, the intersection of Buddhist moral philosophy and technology? And as someone leading research project on Bhutan, or generally, like, the whole data security issue, I cannot emphasize enough how strange it is for most people outside to be able to open the TV and see individuals' personal telephone numbers on TV. But this is also something very contextual and social, that in Bhutan it is not that unusual for people to sort of say, well, if you want to contact someone for this is my contact and this is my number, and it indicates, it's great that it indicates a level of openness and a kind of community setup where people engage with each other. But these are I think the ways in which there are divergences, that in many other contexts, that whole thing about data would be like all sorts of questions around, data boundaries and So yeah, so I think these are some of the things that, a mix of comments and questions that I wanted to offer you. And I don't know if anyone else has any questions, but I certainly want to hear your remarks on your responses or any other further reflections.
Uh,
Thank you.
if there's any question, I'd like to take the questions, and then I'll give my views on the comments that Dr. outlined.
Yes, I'm hoping, I'm hoping that everyone who wants to ask a question would be able to use the raise hand function. And I can't see any right now. It could also be that people are hungry and this is the third session. But we could proceed.
Okay. I'll start answering by like the how data security and like how common it is for how common it's in Bhutan to especially give your phone number or your email address or something like that. So this is exactly what sets Bhutan, what sets Bhutan different from all the other countries that are in. And if you look at this, this is not a technological habit, or they are, it's not coming from a particular tech behavior they're having. If we trace it, then it's coming from the sense of social security and the Buddhist thought they have, the social thinking of our Bhutanese people about meaning no harm to other, no malice to other. You approach it with this universal fraternity idea to everyone that's that's around you. So this is exactly reflecting into our cyberspace. And how do we want to make it more secure, secure for our Bhutanese people, and as well as, and at the same time preserve that authentic Bhutanese social thought that we have of compassion, kindness, and humanity that we have in it. So I think preserving that's very important, and connecting that to the Buddhist philosophy on technology. And I really like how Dr. Konofin puts his about how he puts the Buddhist philosophy into the technology, like where he argues that technology does not have that inherent good or bad aspect. The good or bad aspect is missing in technology inherently. It's neutral inherently, whereas it depends upon the humans and the system that we are creating in order to use that technology, whether it's going to give a positive outcome or if it's going to give a negative outcome. For example, technology is just a mere tool. Technology will always need human aspect of it will always need the human aspect, the human creativity, the human ingenuity, the human innovation, the creativity, the compassion, the empathy. If we are putting that as an input to our technology, then that's going to give a positive, positive outcome at the end. And coming to the point of inconsistent policy. So we are envisioning this digital economy and these digital jobs and freelancers and digital nomads in the country. But in the meantime, we want FDI companies to come into our country. We want a lot of tech companies to be set up in our country. But if we are just churning out BS and BS and BS all the time, we just had our first information and communication college in 2017. Now, though the computer science course was prevalent in some of the other universities, but there was just a small portion of what we are offering to our Buddhist youth as a formal education. Every year we are churning out BS, BS, and BS, and the civil service is able to grab only a certain percentage of it. And if we are churning out only BS all the time, then how are we going to have this digital economy where we have freelancers, where we have digital nomads and all? And also coming back to the coming up with the education, touching on the education sector, how I view it, then the education sector has been very much affected by the inconsistent political will that we have, and the idea of how education should be in the long run. So if we see in last 3 years, then there has been a huge alteration in our education policy. though there is a general consensus among the three governments on their ITC policies, if we see, but when it comes to education, which is one of the most important foundation of a digitalized society, knowledge-based society, then they are the first we came up with this central school policy, which somehow had its own controversies. Then the present government doing away with the class 10, the cutoff point, and lots of other policies that are being, and then now add COVID on that, and there is a general chaos in the education system, and there's no consistent viewpoint that how do we want our kids to be educated, what kind of values do we want them to have that are in line with the 21st century lifestyle. And when we think about our education, I think we are just not thinking about the how our in-country education should be, and that education should also be our Buddhist people and Buddhist youth shall also be able to have that same level of skills and competency while competing at the international level. So how can we make that, and what is our long-term economic policy should be in line with our education policy, which would turn out the workforce that needs in order to fulfill the economic policy that we have. And lastly, touching on the digital poverty. So we understand that if we see and if we generally observe in past 5 to 10 years, then there has been an intellectual of sorts in Thimphu and in Thimphu and better developed regions where you talk about machine learning, coding, and all this AI and all. But if you try to see in other regions, then they still have a problem of shortage of drinking water. All weather multiple routes are still not accessible. So we still have these challenges as well. And also we have a certain section of population who do not have access to digital technology. And when COVID hit us and when whole education was moving into online, then lots of people had especially the lower section of the lower income section of the population had tough time buying phones and making that online education online setup at home. So they had this tough time. So how are we looking into it, and how even are we thinking about a social security net in terms of digital technology that would push and empower the lower section of the population who is having problem with access to technology? And lastly, to answer the state losing power, I would say that state is not losing power in any way, but like there has always been
Hello?
this constant battle between the actors on various actors where they are trying to have max. And once when the whole internet revolution was happening, people thought like these boundaries are not going to matter anymore. But then we saw the the right wing parties coming up all over the world, and then hold on, like, okay, then the liberal model is not working anymore. So I don't think state is going anywhere. I think, but if states are not reinventing itself, if states are not taking care of the tech companies, if they are not ahead of tech companies, if they don't have how our technology should be, or if they don't have idea of how our country's digitalized society should be, then that state would certainly be left out in the international system, which would be the new structure in the upcoming times. That's how I actually view it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jigme. Those were all really interesting. And thank you also for drawing attention to Dr. Karma Phunso's work on the technology and Buddhist philosophy intersection. I really enjoyed also listening to these remarks. I mean, the question of the questions that you raised, these are questions that we all have to grapple with. For instance, that, and when you give the examples of, on the one hand, the digital economy, on the other hand, the foreign direct investment. I mean, I think one sort of elephant in the room that hasn't come up as much is the question of what role does the private sector play? what can the private sector do in this context, and how can it kind of, because essentially there's also the challenge of a very welfareist kind of state that has a long history of taking care of people, coping in modern circumstances, with a philosophy that is holistically around development, but also grappling with the need to have the private sector play an enhanced role and to be able to reform civil services. And these are not easy objectives by any means. So it's not it's definitely not an enviable task for any government, any past,
the more
present.
the themes and arguments that I've raised, I understand that these are not like always black and white. Like it's more nuanced and it's more subtle. There are gray areas in it, so it's not always black and white. But like we just cannot leave it out. So then we got as a society.
Exactly, and I think that's why
rework. So
exactly, and that's why it's so important to have the deliberations, because this is the public sphere now, right? The public sphere is people talking about these things to be able to generate insight, because how we think and talk about things also determines what we are able to see ourselves as being doing. And and this thing of the education sector, the employment policy, technology, all of these, the correlations, these are long-term issues that have to be dealt with in the long term, but also every day, and they involve also other subsets of issues around coordination, around implementation, and so on. So and all of this has been, all these challenges, including governance challenges, have been made so much worse by the pandemic. When you were referring to these things about COVID related education, it's also a global thing. But what is possible within the Bhutanese context is that there's enough attention. It's possible for people to give it enough attention and to have the will to address it. And to not let it be one of those things, hopefully, as in sadly in many other places, it's just one of those things that are just taken as fait accompli. It's just, that's how it is. So I'm glad that that these are questions that are on the agenda. And also, like with the debates around, like with every election you see all of these different debates, but that's also how democracies work. And to everyone listening here, we'll know, I mean, we talk on the one hand of the state, on the other hand we talk of the government. They are of course not the same thing. The state is the state and the governments are what have to kind of cope with these challenges in a different sense. So thank you very much for this, for raising a whole range of issues through the means of through this means of this question, this central question at the heart of all of this, of cyber data sovereignty, digital sovereignty, whatever term we want to use for it. And I think the kind of the cloud of concepts in, if we use a term like digitalization, is a bit different than if we use a term like data sovereignty, in terms of whether we are choosing to emphasize more from sort of status sort of perspective or more from service delivery, implementation, policy planning perspective. So anyway, we look forward very much to this conversation and to having your paper as well, I hope, in the volume. And thank you everyone who has been very patiently bearing with our delayed schedule, including speakers, presenters, audience, everyone. This is, I just feel that it's important to have a good quality of discussion that our presenters have provided. And it would just somehow not have been fair to cut any one of them off at 15 minutes and say, please stop, because they were talking about such interesting things. So in the future, I know that we have to simply have longer sessions, because there's just so much that we need to talk about and listen to. So thank you, everyone. It is now, will someone please tell me what the local time is? Because it's just about to be 10 a.m. here in London. What time is it there? It must be 3. Is it 3 o'clock? No. Oh, no, 2. What is the local time there right now?
It's 2:53, ma'am. 2
yes, exactly. So it's about 3 o'clock. I mean, I am very tempted to say, let's take an hour's break. And I think I will go with that, because for those of you who have been here since morning, it would have been a real struggle. It would, and to kind of to come back again without an hour's break. We as soon as we have our, please start arriving back after the 45-minute mark, because we are going to start definitely within the hour. So we'll take a break at this point, and when we come back, we'll have the next presentation, which takes us across to a different domain, and where we will be, listening to a paper about community ritual, and we will have Tashidema, who's also kindly with us right now. So once we have Kizang will be presenting, and then we'll have Tashidema be the discussant for that. But right now we take a break. Please do try and come back on. It's the same link, or you can stay online and mute yourself after 45 minutes, please. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of the presenters and discussants.